Good morning everyone, it's Clive. Welcome to the Mitchell Brewery. I've got the boiler on. It's a lovely sunny day here in Nottingham. I've got the malt and hops lined up. We're going to have a crack at something from the Brewdog DIY dog catalogue. So let the fun begin, and happy brewing everyone. Cheers. Here we go, this is my trusty notebook, and I say it's a variant of Indie Pale Ale, which is number 300 in the DIY dog catalogue from Brewdog. So here we go. You can download this from the internet. It's fantastic. It's got all the stuff you need. I've got all my material, all my malt and my hops. So I'm using, as you can see here, I'm using just over 3 kilos of Marisotta. I'm using Munich malt, caramel malt, wheat malt, crystal malt. So here they are all lined up here. And I'm using the remains of my flake hops. I've got Magnum, Cascade, Pilgrim and East Kent Goldings, and it says here no dry hopping. I think it's sort of like dry hopping can sometimes make your beer pretty bitter if you're not careful, and M44 yeast I'm going to use as well. So here we go, all the materials are lined up and let the fun begin. As you can see, I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to brewing, and ever since I started, which is nearly 10 years ago now, back in 2009, I've kept a couple of little notebooks. And here we go. For the first half dozen brews that I was using a real ale kit, and here it's actually a pretty good one, Woodford's Norfolk Wherry. And it wasn't until about brew number 7, when did we go, that's brew 8. Brew number 7 when I actually started brewing full grain, the full mash method of brewing, and that was back in 2011. So ever since then you can see a whole variety of beers that I've attempted. Happy Accident, so that sounds like a good one. Even had a go at Guinness, which never really turned out that brilliantly, to be honest. It was dark, but it didn't taste like Guinness. Harvest Pale, this is Castle Rock, it's a local brewery here in Nottingham, that's a great one. Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. I've always tried to make a nice hoppy pale ale. I never quite come close enough for my liking. So that was Brewbook number 1. Then I moved on to number 2. Here we go, another Guinness. As you can see, I make a note of every stage of the brewing process, from when the boiler goes on, how much malt and hops I'm adding, the yeast hydration. I always keep the sort of yeast packet as well. I even make notes about when things go slightly awry, like when the boiler cuts out. And here we go, you can see all the notes that I make about when timings, etc. So I'll be doing exactly the same again today. So here we go, this is today's brew, and here we go. This I'll be filming soon as I go along. This is M44, this is the yeast that I was referring to earlier. So what I normally do, I rehydrate the yeast before I use it. So I've got a few containers lined up. So I've just boiled the kettle. So I use about 110 mils of boiled and cooled water. So basically I'll put the water in this beer mug, and that'll sterilise it, and then I will then add the yeast once the water is less than 30 degrees C. So we don't want it too hot, otherwise that will kill off the yeast. And then you just let the yeast then rehydrate with that water, and then you pitch it into the beer later, and you'll see that later in the video. Here we go, the boiler's now ready. You can see I've got my fan set up in here, because if I don't have a fan, this place will be dripping with condensation. I'm going to just turn off the boiler, and that's going to let that cool right down now, down to less than 80 degrees C, and then I can go on to the mash tun stage. Here you can see I've got my primary fermentation bin soaking in sterilising solution. Now I use Milton sterilising tablets, which is, I think, normally meant to be used for sterilising baby things, but as I always say, if it's good enough for babies, it's good enough for beer. And I've got my bubbler in there, and hopefully that will be nice and clean and sterilised. And the mantra is clean, clean, clean in brewing, to make sure everything is absolutely spotless. Okay, the water is less than 80, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to put 10 litres of this, using my trusty jug, into the mash tun. Ta-da! So here we go, this is the mash tun. So this is where the malt will steep in this water. That then dissolves the sugar away from the malt. So let's crack on with this. Okay, so that is 10 litres of boiled cool water. I'm now going to add the malt addition, and as I've said before, here we go. Just got over 3.12 kilos of Maris Otter pale malt, 152 grams of Munich malt, which is an odd amount, but it's all I've got left. Same for the caramel, 250, that's all I've got. Wheat malt, 400 grams, so I've upped that from the Brewdog recipe, and I've added in crystal malt to make up the difference. So here we go. Very exciting. New spoon! Woohoo! So I'm just going to give this a good old stir. So I'll make sure that all of the grain comes into contact with the water, and basically the idea is that obviously this water is dissolving the sugar away from the malted barley, and obviously that sugar later on ferments to become alcohol, so it's important that we remove as much of the sugar from this mash as possible. So I better crack on because I don't want to lose the heat from this, so I shall just give it a good stir and then seal it up. Okay, I've stirred up the grain in the water, so I'm going to seal up. I've put the lid on the mash tun, and I've got this cover that I put on just to give it extra insulation. Okay, the mash tun's sealed up. That will now stay for an hour and a half. So what's the time? So it's 10 o'clock, so 11:30 I'll take this off and then move on to the next stage, and that'll be to sparge. So I need to get the boiler back full up and get it boiling again and cool down, ready for the sparging. So the water is cooled down to less than 30. I'm just going to tip this yeast into here, and what I normally do is just leave that 15 minutes and then give it a stir, and then it just hydrates, and then you pitch it later into the beer. The boiler has reached 100, so I'm letting it cool down. This fan will help. And what I've done in preparation for sparging, I've attached this hose to the tap here. The end of the hose is this fine rose from a watering can, which I use to play across the grain surface. So just another 10 or 15 minutes for this to finish, and then I'll get on to sparging. Okay, the boiler's ready again. This has cooled down to less than 80 degrees C, so it's time to uncover the mash tun. Now this is probably one of my favourite stages of brewing, because smell that Ovaltine malty goodness. So what I've got to do now is this water gets sparged through here, washing the sugar from here, and then it's collected into this container down here. This will take about 15-20 minutes. Before the sparging starts, I'll just drain off the first flush of sugary solution from the grain, because this will probably have lots of sediment in it. So what I'm going to do, this is going to get tipped back through the grain, which will act as a bit of a filter bed to capture those sort of sedimentary particles. Well, that's the theory anyway. Okay, we're ready to start sparging now, so I'll turn on the tap. You can see, got a nice fine spray of water which will play over the surface of the grain. The idea is to not completely swamp the grain, but to keep it just about submerged, so that the water is sort of just at the surface of the grain, and hopefully it'll all drain through without the grain sort of packing so tightly round the outlet at the bottom that it stops. And that's sometimes happens when you get a stuck sparge, as it were. So let's keep doing this. So it's 11:48. So let's see how long this lasts. That's taken about 17-18 minutes to drain. There's a little bit of water left in there to drain that through the mash, and basically I've got two containers here. I'm going to let this one continue to drain through here, and all of this now needs to go back into the boiler and then get back up to 100 degrees C. So this is roughly at about sort of 55 degrees, that sort of temperature normally. This will get back up to boiling, and then we'll start adding the hops. So at the minute this is called the sweet wort, and then after the hops have been added it becomes known as the bitter wort. The sweet wort now is up to 100 degrees C, and you can see a nice head on here. I'm going to start adding the hops in a minute, so they're all lined up over here ready to go in. This is the first hop. This is Magnum, so this will go in straight away. Give that a little bit of a stir. Now you may think you could go and have a cup of tea and sit down for an hour and a half while the hot boil is going on for 90 minutes, but you'll be sadly mistaken, because there's lots of cleaning and sorting out to do. So in the meantime, I've been getting on. I have cleaned out the mash tun, so here you go, that's nice and clean. You're thinking, where has all the malt gone from there? So let me just show you what I've done with the malt. There we go, you can see. Go. It's all drained off, and sadly I'm not one of those people that make malt biscuits or have a pig to feed this to, so this gets binned, and then I've been sterilising. That's remained from my sterilising solution, and I've been generally very busy. Next thing is to connect my chiller up to the tap. Okay, you may have noticed this I've added. This is the copper chiller. This is a really efficient heat exchanger. Water goes in here, circulates around from the bottom, around the tube, picking up heat, and then comes out the top. This will then be nice and warm, and then this will cool down this bitter wort from 100 degrees down to less than 30 in roughly 10 or 15 minutes. It's really quick, otherwise it would take hours and hours. Since moving the brewery, I'm slightly further away from the tap, as you can see. Hopefully all of these connections are going to hold, and here is the outside tap. For those that watched before, so this was the original brewery, and that gap there is where my brewing table used to be. This is now my son's gym. Right, we're ready for the next hop addition, 10 minutes from the end of the hop boil. Now the reason we don't add all the hops at the beginning of the boil is a lot of those oils will evaporate and will lose a lot of the flavour and the aroma, so we tend to add things later. So the first hops we added were for bittering, these ones will probably be more for flavour, and at the very end when we turn off the boiler we'll add in the East Kent Goldings, and that will probably be more for aroma. Here we go then, so let's add in these hops. Okay, that's the end of the hop boil. I've just added the last hop addition. I'm going to turn off the boiler, and I'm going to go and turn on the chiller. Chiller turned on, and water's going in here, and you can feel that's cold. Put your hand on here and you can feel that's hot, that's hot. So that heat exchanger is working extremely efficiently. So the temperature, oh, it's already gone down to 90 degrees, so that's pretty miraculous. So that shouldn't take long to go down to less than 30. There we go, the chiller has taken 12 minutes to get it from 100 to less than 30. I've also taken the opportunity to get a couple of hydrometer samples at the same time. This is now going to be drained from here into the primary fermentation bin. Okay, let's see how much we've managed to get out of here. So we're looking at about 5 gallons of bitter wort. Okay, the bitter wort is in the primary fermenter, so all remains to do now is to pitch the yeast into here and then leave this for about a week before I go on to the second stage. It's been 9 days since the beer was in the primary fermenter, so that's completely stopped bubbling. So I'm ready now to decant this into the pressure barrel, and then that will go into these bottles. I've got 42 bottles here. That seemed like an appropriate number for all those Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fans out there. 42 is always the best one. I've also got my brewing sugar. I've put a tip of a teaspoon in each of these bottles. Prior to that, I'll put 71 grams of brewing sugar in here. I've also got some beer finings. I've also got my trusty measuring cylinders here ready to work out the alcohol content, the gravity at this stage. So let's get on with the decanting from here into here. Let's just take the lid off of here and to have a peek. Here we go. You can see this is what it looks a bit scuzzy at this stage, but here we go. This is the bitter water after the primary fermentation stage. So I've got my siphon. This will then go into here. Okay, this is the siphoning stage, and you can see I've got the siphon. You can just about see it. You can see it bubbling about at the bottom there. You can see a layer of sediment at the bottom of this container. I've got 5 gallons to siphon off into this pressure barrel. Bear in mind, everything has been scrupulously sterilised with Milton sterilising solution, including all these bottles. So at this stage it's really important to make sure that everything, including yourself, is spotlessly clean. That took about 15 minutes to siphon from the primary fermentation bin into the pressure barrel. As you can see, I've pretty much filled this up. I've also taken a couple of samples for the hydrometer test later. I'll let those settle out. I'm going to now use my trusty jug to fill up the bottles here. Before I fill up the bottles, I will add some finings to the beer. I will also add 71 grams of brewing sugar to this as well. And there we have it, 42 bottles of beer, all tucked up in the bottles. I'm going to put them in the cupboard. There's a nice space there for them to go in. They'll stay in there for about 3 weeks. I'm going to come up with a label for the bottles, and they'll be hopefully enjoyable to drink. Okay everyone, that's the end of the video. Happy brewing!